Seventh chords are things of wonder and beauty. By adding the seventh tone to a typical triad, we gain a certain amount of depth and texture that wasn't really there before. In this video, we'll be giving you a seventh chord arpeggio starter pack. We'll be talking about 5 different types of seventh chords and giving you one arpeggio shape for each of them. Those chord types we'll be talking about are the dominant seventh, the major seventh, the minor seventh, the half diminished, and the fully diminished. First, let's talk about the dominant seventh chord. Now this is a major triad with the addition of the flat 7 tone, creating a chord that builds tension that wants to resolve. Now we'll be looking at the E shape arpeggio, which starts on the low E string played with our second finger. After our root, we move down to the A string with our first finger and then stretch over an extra fret with our third finger. This sets us up for the rest of the arpeggio. Now we move down a string to our first finger to play the flat 7 tone, which is located 2 frets below our root note, which we'll be playing with our third finger. And now we move down a string to the second finger, move down a string to the first finger, and move over on our B string to our fourth finger to play the second flat 7 tone. Now move down to get our root note, and we can even stretch over with our pinky an extra fret to hit the third. And now we descend down to our lowest root, remembering to get that stretch in there. And when we get here, we can even stretch back with our first finger to get the flat 7 below the root. Now played to speed, this arpeggio shape looks like this. Next we're going to be looking at the major 7th chord. Now, like our dominant 7th, it's built off of a major triad, but has a natural 7 instead of a flat 7. Now the natural 7 is located 1 fret below the root. So, root note, natural 7. Alright? For comparison's sake, we'll be doing an E shape as well. Now it starts off very much the same. Same note here, and our next note's going to be the same, but instead of stretching over with our third finger, we're going to lay down our fourth finger. After that, we're going to move down a string to our third finger. This tone is the natural 7th, and as I said before, it's located 1 fret below the root note, which we'll be playing with our fourth finger. After that, we move down a string to our third finger, down a string to our second finger, and down a string to our first finger for our second natural 7th. Naturally, we resolve up to the root note. We're going to play that with our second finger. And now descend back down to our lowest root, and we can move down 1 fret to our first finger to catch the natural 7th. Played to speed, our E shape major arpeggio looks like this. Now our next chord is going to be built off of a minor triad. We'll be looking at the A shape of a D minor chord. Now we start off on the A string with our first finger on the root note. Move over to your fourth finger and move down to the D string with your third finger. Now we have to move down to the G string with our first finger to play the flat 7th, which we should remember is always located 2 frets below the root note, which we'll be playing with our third finger. Now we move down a string to our second finger, move down a string to our first finger, and over to our fourth finger for the second flat 7 tone. Descend back towards the root, and once we get there, we want to move to our low E string with our fourth finger for a flat 7, and then to our first finger, and we can return to the root. Played to speed, a minor 7th A-shape arpeggio looks like this. Our last two arpeggio shapes, the diminished chords, are built off of a minor triad with a flatted 5th. To demonstrate what that looks like and sounds like, I'm going to play an E minor 7th chord. Now I need to take the natural, the perfect 5th, and lower it by 1 fret. So I might be moving a lot of fingers, but I'm keeping all the notes where they were before and just lowering the 5th. Hopefully you can hear the difference immediately. That flat 5 sound creates a certain darkness and tension that wasn't really there before. While this might sound like a bizarre chord, if used in the right context, it's very effective and can really be the highlight of a chord progression. Now, this specific chord I'm playing right here is known as a half diminished. It has a flat 7. As we'll see later, our fully diminished has a different 7th tone. Okay, so what we need to know about the half diminished is that we have our root, a flat 3rd, a flat 5, and a flat 7. Now the arpeggio shape we'll be looking at is the C shape. We're going to start with our 3rd finger on the A string, move down to our 1st finger on the D string, and then move over to our 4th finger on that same string. Hopefully we can hear it already. This note we're playing with our 4th finger is the flat 5 tone. It gives diminished chords and diminished arpeggios their characteristic sound. Now here's a minor triad, dark, but let's change it to diminished. It gets even darker, it gets tenser when we flatten the 5th. Okay, so let's take it from there. Flat 5th. After that, we need to get our flat 7 in. We're going to be playing that on the G string with our 3rd finger. Now we move down to the B string for our root note, over on that string to our 4th finger, and then down to the high E with our 2nd finger for the highest flat 5 in this shape. Now let's descend back down to that root note. We have to get a flat 7 in now, so we're going to move down 2 frets to our 1st finger, and then move to our low E string with our 2nd finger for the lowest flat 5 in this arpeggio shape. And so played to speed, our half diminished arpeggio looks like this. Now let's talk about the fully diminished. As I said before, it has a different 7th than the half diminished chord. So here's our half diminished chord. We're going to take the flat 7th and lower it 1 fret. This tone is now the natural 6th, which in this context is sometimes called the flat 7, the double flat 7, because that tone is taking the role of a 7th tone in this 7th chord. And so whenever you hear natural 6th or flat 7 in the context of a fully diminished chord, they're talking about the same tone, this tone. Now the diminished chord, it's a special type of chord. It's called a symmetrical chord. That means each note is the same distance from every other note. For a diminished chord, that is a flat 3rd. So there's a special trick you can do with your symmetrical chords. You can move the same chord shape up or down that interval, so in this case a minor third, to get the next voicing. And if you begin to study some of the other chord voicings, you might see that there are fewer ways to play this chord because you can play the same shape in different areas. Alright, so we're going to talk about the C-shape arpeggio for a fully diminished chord. It's going to start off the same way: third finger A string, first finger D string, fourth finger D string. Now we need to play that flat, flat 7. So instead of using our third finger on the G string, we're going to use our second finger. And now the rest of the arpeggio is pretty much the same. We're going to use our first finger on the B for our root, fourth finger on the B, and second finger on the high E string. Now we descend back down to that root note, and if we want to go lower, we need to stretch our first finger back to catch that double flat 7. Alright, now we need to hit the flat 5 on the low E string. Instead of stretching again with our second finger, we're going to use our third finger. And then to return to the root, go back to our first finger and stretch back with our third finger so we're ready to play that arpeggio again. Okay, so there are many more arpeggio shapes that we can use to play these chord types, but I encourage you, start off with these ones, master them, work them into your playing, learn how to use them when you see that chord on a chord chart, or you know it's coming. And as always, good luck and happy jamming.